Welcome to LSC. It's Sports Time. I'm your host, Bob Hintz. Today I have with me my former colleague, Tim Kohl, who has come up here from South Carolina to join me for this segment. And we're at Darling Stadium, where Tim and I had a whole lot of memories. Welcome, Tim.
Thank you, Bob.
Did you have a nice trip up?
I had a great trip up here. I was so excited about getting back here, I couldn't wait to get here.
Oh, I tell you, we've talked about this thing for so long. You're going to love what we're doing. But anyway, we're going to talk a little bit about you and how you got involved in this and everything. I know you went to Hampton High School.
I did, back when the dinosaurs were still roaming around the city of Hampton. 1964 was my graduating class. Coach Siegfried was over the football coach program. But of course, I was raised out in Fort Monroe. My dad was in the Army. So we moved around all over the country and all over the world, and every time we came back to the States, we came back to Fort Monroe. So Hampton's always been home.
When you graduated from high school, what happened then?
Well, I tried to get into the Army. I was ready to go to Vietnam. Believe it or not, that was that long ago.
Wow.
Tried to go to Vietnam, and they turned me down, thank goodness.
You too good looking or what?
Yeah, that's what it was. No, I'm not sure what. I had a bad shoulder, so they wouldn't take me. But eventually went to work for an insurance company for a while, and then ultimately with the Daily Press for about 25 years.
Yeah, now when you were at the Daily Press, and that was kind of neat because we could get all kinds of statistics from them. But let's talk a little bit about what got you into doing sports, because you didn't start with us. You did a lot of stuff with Warner Cable, if I remember.
Exactly, and what happened was a good friend of mine was working at Warner Cable back in the early 70s, and they decided they wanted to do some local origination, and they were going to do the Hampton Gulls hockey team.
Hampton Gulls hockey.
Yeah, and so I was actually a kind of a gopher with the team. I was always an avid hockey fan, and they decided while we were there one day to say, hey, let's tape some games and see if Warner Cable will put them on the air. So they said, Tim, you sound like you've got a decent sports broadcasting voice. And I said, well, whatever you think. So we did it, and as they say, the rest is history. We did that for about 3 years. And then Dr. Sam Stills, the late Dr. Stills, which, by the way, I want to send my condolences to his family. But Dr. Stills contacted me and wanted me to do a couple of things with the city of Hampton. Right. And then you and I got hooked into doing something that went on and on and on.
I tell you, and it was, we were talking about this earlier, 1980. They called me and asked me to join this guy by the name of Tim Kohl, who you was doing some, if I remember, you doing some Hampton Institute at that time, Hampton Institute football and basketball games?
I was. Warner was doing Hampton Institute. We were doing William and Mary football and basketball. We did Hampton Institute basketball and football. We did some CNU. Went back when the early days of CNU up in Newport News. So if they put a microphone in front of me, I'd be glad to broadcast something. That was always something I always wanted to do.
But as we were talking about it, once you got this thing, you and I just kind of seemed to hit it off, and it just blew my mind. And you had a friend of yours named Jerry, I think, that did the stats for us.
Yeah, Jerry unfortunately passed away a few years ago, but Jerry and I kind of came together. We were at Warner together, so right. When Dr. Stills joined us together, and after that it was you and me and Bethel.
Right. Well, let's talk a little bit about that first game, because you remember and I remember what it was like when we did that first game.
We were in the old stadium before they renovated Darling. And if anyone remembers that, on the opposite side now, which is the visitors' side at the new Darling Stadium, was the home side. And they had the press box set there, and right beneath the press box, the band would play. And that first game, we were sitting there, and we didn't have headsets. We just had hand microphones. And it seemed like every time there was a play on the field, the band would strike up. So they would start playing whatever they were playing, and you and I couldn't hear each other, let alone imagine anyone else could hear us.
And somebody asked me how that went, and I said, well, I just watched him, and when his mouth stopped moving, then I would talk, because that's basically because we couldn't hear each other. But because then there was no glass in it, it was just a wooden window that they opened up, and the band was directly underneath us. And
they were 2 feet from us, and we tried to get them to stop playing, but obviously the band is an important part of the high school scene.
Well, they weren't going to stop for us anyway. Go this first time, who's these two guys? But as we did that game, and Hampton won the game, if I remember, and that back then they didn't have the playoff system like we have now, and they went on to the state. Well, the next year comes around, and here it's Bethel and Hampton again, and Dr. Musselman said, well, you can't forget Phoebus and Kecoughtan. So we did 2 games the second year.
It just evolved from 1 game to 2 games, and then became the game of the week.
Right.
Because it wasn't right to slight anyone else in the Peninsula District.
Right.
So it worked out so that we were doing a full schedule, and then of course the state championships and the regionals and
Start contests and just goes on and on and on.
It's a sporting event. We did it.
Yeah. Well, you know, and a lot of people don't understand what we did. We'd go wherever the game was. We'd go to Bailey Field. We'd go to Williamsburg. Wherever we got to see some awesome athletes.
We absolutely did. In fact, I was able to, and I still watch some of the old games on the internet down in South Carolina when I lived in Charleston. And I was watching a game just before I came up here, and it was the replay of the game between Hampton and Deep Creek. And it was that infamous game when Ronald Curry was the quarterback. I was asked to be a co-announcer for that game because both of our schools did games, and since they were the home team, they were going to do the broadcast, but were kind enough to invite me to be in there. And the last play of the game, with 3 seconds to go, there was a pass completed, so-called, in the end zone. Quote, yeah, it was never a catch. And, of course, I had to be very politically correct and say, well, gee, you know, that was a tough call, but that's the way they... And I've never forgotten that. When I watched that the other day, I thought, oh, my gosh, I got to remember to bring that up when we talk, because that was the robbery of the century.
Oh, definitely was, because it was very possible that Curry could have won the state championship all 4 years that he was quarterbacking. But, you know, you and I talked about that team, because that was probably one of the highlights that we got to do, to see a team evolved as well as they do. But the center was Adam Lively, and he was a freshman, and him and Ronald went through 4 years together. How often do you find a quarterback and a center 4 years through high school?
Well, you know, the teams on the peninsula, specifically Hampton, have just dominated football in the eastern region for years. And, of course, a lot of this got to do with the great coaching that's come from here. Hampton continues to have a team. It's like the game we'll be doing later between Hampton and Bethel. Right. 2-0, both teams going in. You know, it used to be the end of the season game. Right. Someone asked me about that the other day, and I said, no, they don't. They just make the schedule out, and if it's the first game or if it's the last game, that's the way it falls.
Yeah, and this year the last game comes out to be Hampton and Phoebus. The 2 teams that are, you know, they've been, Phoebus has won the last 3 championships in a row. They've got 46, 47 wins in a row. So, you know, it just seems like we're so lucky to have been part of what has gone on the peninsula in sports, not just in basketball, in football. But we did basketball, and then we did baseball, softball, and your most favorite one you did was soccer.
Soccer was always my favorite. Talk about a person lost for words when it came to a sport.
Yeah, I remember one of the games that you were doing. You went back in, I don't know, you talk about going back in time. You went back and said they used to play on the ice, and the field was like miles long. I said, I don't know where you got all this information.
I don't know where I did either. But I have to say something, and I'm not sure how long we get to do this, but I wanted to say one thing, that we were privileged to see some of the greatest athletes, high school athletes, to ever come through a school system. And I can't even start to name them all, but when you talk about Ronald Curry, you talk about Allen Iverson, you talk about Bobby Blizzard, you talk about, and I can't even start to, because I was afraid I'd leave out dozens of players. But we really saw the cream of the crop, and it was so gratifying to do these games and let these guys and their families enjoy seeing themselves on television, and then to go on and have great careers in college and in some cases in the pros.
Well, and I was talking to Kevin Swan. I got him in and did a little sports time with him. He is a preacher now, and he said the kids laugh at him when they see the shows because he's got on the real short shorts.
Yes, and I can always tell when I watch one of the old games on 48 on the internet, I can look at the shorts and I know whether that was a game you and I did or one that's done for the crew now. So
no, we'll know when the shorts are short that it's not the crew now. They got the long shorts. You're now living in South Carolina. And somebody said, well, is he coming back up? Your mother lives up here, right?
My mother lives up here. She'll be 92 next year. So I visited her the other day, and yeah, she's doing well. So I try to get up to Hampton 3 or 4 times a year if I can, but moved down to Charleston. Absolutely love Charleston. I'll give a great plug for the beautiful city of Charleston every time.
Donna wants you to contact the local colleges and all to do what we had done, and I think, you know, I'm on her bandwagon. I think you should do that.
Well, she's trying to get to that. I'm hopeful to retire in another year or so that would be a great retirement job to have.
Oh, it would be awesome. All right, we're going to wrap this thing up, but the last thing I want to do is I want you what are some of your most vivid memories of particular games or particular ball players that you would just like to talk before we wrap this thing up?
It's real easy because 2 of them come to mind instantly. One was the Allen Iverson led Bethel Bruins, who won the state championship up in Charlottesville when they were down by 8 points to go with like less than 2 minutes. And Allen Iverson personally brought them back, and they ultimately won the championship. That was amazing. Hampton won the state championship in basketball. That was amazing. But the game that stands out most in my mind was the game in Richmond when we were at the playoffs, and Ronald Curry and the Hampton Crabbers were playing in a blizzard of rain. It was a hurricane, just like, I mean, the wind was running the rain sideways, and it was, you and I sloshed through about a foot water to get to the press box, Virginia Union, and Ronald Curry threw some passes with a soaking wet ball to soaking wet receivers that were so perfectly thrown and so perfectly caught that game impressed me beyond any I've ever seen, whether it was college or high school.
And that was Maude Hawkins was one of the recipients of those passes. Well, you know, but I just remembered that it was 0-0 at the end of the first quarter, and then they kicked the ball to Ronald, and he ran it back, and after that it was like he couldn't do anything wrong.
I think they won 52-0 or something like that. Ultimately, 55.
It was, yeah.
But it was absolutely a downpour. It was the worst conditions I've ever seen possible, and this young man was amazing. Amazing was the only word I could use to describe him.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you taking time to do this little segment with me.
Oh, I love it, Bob, and I'm so glad to be back here to do one more game at least with you here on good old Channel 48.
Thanks for tuning in to LSC and Sports Time. I want to thank my special guest, Tim Kohl. I'm Bob Hintz. Until next time.